This is Pop Chaos. This is Jay, and I am joined tonight by two people I have known for a very long time. This is Mr. V and Dez. We have all played many games together, been in guilds together. As I said, have known each other for many years. And tonight we were going to come and talk about an old game we used to play, Star Wars Galaxies, and the upcoming Star Wars The Old Republic. So I think we'll start off by talking about Galaxies a little bit, some of the things we did and did not like about it, and we'll move on into Tor. So, who here wants to get us started on the years of gameplay we put into Galaxies?
Well, I can say that I played for 6 years, and I think part of that was a waste of money.
Yeah, I'd have to agree that part of that was, I mean, for me it was fun for a while, but the last probably 2 or 3 years of that just was more searching for something to do than anything else.
Yeah, I think that was a rather large part of our gameplay time. Was really searching for things to do or trying to contemplate ways that we could have fun. I think that the game was very limited on content for how old it was.
Well, and a
But
lot a lot of people would go and say, well, they switched developers and the new developers didn't know how to put in new things, but I've always thought that that was a little bit of bullshit myself.
Well, who knows? I mean, it could be, one or the other, or it could have just been a lack of time and funding, and who knows?
I'm going to lean on the funding part.
Well,
But
go ahead.
there were a lot of good things about the game. I mean, the space combat and space flight was excellent, even though it wasn't like actual space. It was more like atmospheric flight, but
Well,
still, that was great.
Sorry about that. If you think about it, space was one of the parts that they rarely ever touched. For the most part, it was pretty much the way it was as soon as they implemented it and jumped to light speed. I mean, I know that they eventually brought in, the gunships, some of the newer ships, added a ship here and there, and eventually added the space duty missions and, the Blackguard in
Well, but
the
see,
newer
okay,
space sector.
you brought out you mentioned the whole gunships and everything. That will bring me into probably my biggest complaint. Well, one of the biggest complaints I had about Galaxies, and that was it really wasn't a game if you think about it. It was more of a grind fest. Everything you wanted to do, you had to spend hours upon hours, if not days or weeks, grinding some redundant piece of shit that would get you queued up to do whatever it is you want to do. Like the gunships, it took you all like what? How long to grind out one of those things?
First time we did it,
Yeah.
I think Des can probably answer that better than I can. He was the
It,
first one to actually get. He was the first one of us to actually get one.
yeah, it actually to get the gunship, the neutral gunship, the Black Sun gunship was just it took weeks. I mean, I can't remember exactly how long it took, but I mean, it took weeks, 4 or 5 of us, going up in a YT, and just it was monotonous, really.
And
I
you
think
had you had the different tiers. I mean, I remember I almost accomplished that. You guys helped me out a lot, but I still liked a few. But I mean, it got to the point where you had to get like tier five. I mean, all the way from tier one to tier five, and you had some of those ships you had to blow up like what 50 of them, something like that.
a
Yep.
couple of them in the higher tiers that wanted you to kill like 100 of each.
Right.
Hmm.
I recall that the lower tiers, for the most part, you could find just static, big, huge, friggin' spawns of them that you could just fly into, piss them all off, drag them about, and blow them up.
And
Yeah,
Or
you could even the lower tiers you could have done,
in a
solo in
fighter,
like a
yeah.
fighter or bomber or interceptor or something
Well,
like that.
even all the way up to tier 4, you could have done that with specific spawns of them, but whenever it came to tier 5, most of those they put out there in the newer space zone that they made specifically for the POB missions and the uh,
the
Blackguard
duty
heroic.
missions, they did duty missions later on where you could do that stuff.
Yeah,
The duty said, "Oh, now you can do duty missions."
which
And
was
it was
nice for
like,
getting them for alts at least.
yeah, but
Well, but see, the monotonous aspect of the game didn't stop with space. I mean, that was honestly something that was thrown in later towards the end of the game because
Well,
getting,
afterthought.
well, I mean, getting to Ace seemed monotonous at first until the gunships came out. I mean, getting to Ace was relatively easy compared to that, but the whole game followed this same formula. I mean, like getting the meditation holocrons for Jedi, and then
Oh, the collection system.
yeah, the
Yeah, that.
collections, and then the weeds that you all went out there to pull. I mean, that
Oh my word, yeah.
to
You
me,
had to
I
remind me of
mean,
that.
I wasn't playing the game when the weeds thing came out, and I remember Mr. V bitching like crazy every day about needing this one weed, and I thought to myself, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. I mean, I don't remember anything in Star Wars where you had to go out to different planets and look for fucking weeds. What are you trying to get high, or what's the deal?
Yeah, it was Nim's theme park. I
Yeah.
mean, the rewards in the end were fairly decent, but it was just, yeah, it was ridiculous because there was one weed that, you would only get like 1 out of 50 times.
All right. Well, even before the collections, I mean, I understand they tried to bring in the collections to try to give us something to do, and a lot of people loved it, a lot of people hated it. But before that, I don't remember much of anything for us to be able to do. I mean, they implemented the whole instance thing, with IG-88 and the ISD and all those. But
Now, admittedly, those were fun,
they
yes.
were fun, yes.
They
But the
were.
the preparation that went into getting into these instances, and I'm not talking about the prequest. I'm talking about sitting around in Isley for hours on end trying to find somebody to be in your group just so you could complete these instances.
I'm sure that if things had been different for us while we were there and we were in a larger guild, it would have been a little bit different because there would have been a lot more people and so on and so forth. But considering the fact that we were a smaller guild, finding people was indeed a problem, especially finding competent people that still needed to do their things. Because most people who had already done heroics, let's just go and face it, they didn't want to do them anymore. Most of them were interested in PvP by that point.
Yeah, because they were in a big guild and, they tended more to lean more towards helping their guild members out than helping, like your
Just
random
whoever.
player.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, see, and that's something else that I was going to talk about is the whole. It was almost like going back to high school, and at least on the server that we were on, because you had your cliques, and if you weren't a part of one of these cliques, you were nobody. Nobody. It didn't matter how good at the game you were. It didn't matter what you had, what you'd accomplished. You weren't going to get in a group
Because they didn't know you.
because they either didn't know you or they just didn't want you coming along, and that's where the whole being in a big guild and being recognized came in.
I believe that may have been more of a social problem generated mostly just from our server and who all was on it. But I do believe that there were other servers that had similar problems, but I can't really say anything because I only played on one server during my entirety there.
Yeah, the people that I talked to that transferred from other servers, it wasn't just our server that was having the problem. There were other servers that were having the same problem. Whereas if you weren't in a big guild, then you were nothing. That just, in a way, that kind of irritated me because, like you said before, it did make me feel like I was back in high school and, grammar school. And if you weren't the popular kid, then you weren't nothing.
Right. No,
Well,
I totally agree.
that could possibly stem from a possible design flaw with the game, and that's the fact that unless you were doing collections or missioning, which
There
once
were
you did
none.
all your missions, there were very few left. There was no way to mission anymore. But unless you were doing something in that vein of things to do, or maybe even PvPing, there is no solo content.
No, there's really not. I mean, and that was the big problem with Galaxies. If you weren't in a big guild or you didn't know a lot of people and could get in these groups, there was literally nothing to do.
Well, I got a question for you guys. What was your favorite class? Mine was bounty hunter and officer.
That's kind of a hard question. During the time I was there, I flip-flopped between a few different classes. I
Well, I was going to
changed.
mention that all three of us played pretty much every class that was offered in Galaxies. I still have to say my favorite was Jedi. It's what I played all the time. Well, most of the time. I tried out the other classes, but I know you guys were partial to Bounty Hunter.
I quite enjoyed Bounty Hunter, and I also enjoyed Smuggler. I mean, I was not very good at Bounty Hunter. I was much better at Smuggler than I was at Bounty Hunter.
Well, I would say we were excellent PVE bounty hunters.
Well,
As
yeah, but
far as the
then again,
PvP part, Yeah, it was just
PvE was not very hard in that game. I mean,
no.
Since Des brought up the whole PvE versus PvP thing, that brings me to something else I was going to talk about. The way that stats worked in that game, getting your stat close, and how they mixed up the system where you could be really good at PvE or really good at PvP, but it was really hard to be good at both unless you had multiple sets of clothes, multiples of the weapons, and let's face it, with the economy the way it was in that game, that was just impossible for a lot of people to do.
well, the
Well,
problem with the economy was the fact that, from what I understand, I mean, I'm not a pre-NG player by any means, nor am I a pre-CU player, but from what I understand, when they removed item decay from the game, as well as changing a few of the other way that the trading systems and even the way the credit system worked, from what I hear, there was no major money sink aside from respecing your character or redoing your skills so many times that it's not even funny. Um, and I think that that's where the major economic problem came from.
well, not only that, you could go out and grind a handful of NPCs and then instantly have 100,000 credits. I mean,
Yeah,
that
the
that
the money
contributed
dropped.
to it too. Yeah,
The
I
the
mean,
amount of the amount of credits dropped per mob was significantly increased from what I understand. Or perhaps it's the fact that after the combat upgrade and the NGE, perhaps it was the fact that the mobs were much easier now than they were then, because from what I understand, it was much harder to kill a single mob then than it
Well,
is.
not only that, but they sped up the combat so much that killing your mobs was a lot faster than it was. I mean, I played the pre-NG on the emulator twice, and I'll be honest with you, I honestly did not care for it. I did not like the style. I did not like the way that they had the abilities set up, and I didn't like the way that you had so many abilities. It was confusing as to which one it was that you needed to use. And once again, I didn't play it for any length of time, so I'm not an expert or anything. But I didn't like the way it was set up. I didn't like the high speed of the NGE. I thought the combat was way too fast.
It was breakneck fast.
It was too fast. It was face rolling. You could just face roll on your keyboard and you could win. But
Well, in my opinion, the major problem with the NG's combat system is the fact that it seems that for most classes, you had a lot of attacks, but a lot of them, it seems, on at least especially on certain classes like say Spy for instance, you have a lot of attacks that do nothing but just deal damage.
we're running out of time for part one here. So, Des, why don't you give us your final thoughts of SWG, and then we'll move on to part two, and we'll start talking about Tor.
well, uh, Galaxies was like 50-50 for me. It it was good. Space combat was excellent. Some of the instances and everything. I mean, the undead theme park, I loved that. That was great.
That was fun. That was.
It was.
Um, there it was just it was a toss up really. I mean, it was the good with the bad, and the bad part of it was that if you weren't in a big guild, you weren't anything. You couldn't get any of your static clothing as fast as you wanted to, as if you were in a big guild. And just the endless grinding. I mean, let's face it, who wants to sit there and grind, 100 NPCs just to move up to the next bunch where you have to grind 150?
No, I totally agree. And as I said, we're gonna stop this for a second and take a small break, and then we'll come back with our thoughts on Tor so far, what we hope to see in Tor, and we'll compare the two a little bit. And later on, we'll probably come back with another segment of this after a few weeks after Tor has been released, so we can give another um, idea, our thoughts on how the game has been since the release. So for now, this has been Mr. V, Dez, and Jay for Pop Chaos talking about Star Wars Galaxies